All right, I'm going to go over to my share screen. And first of all, take a look at some of the things that I have shared with you. I do have a couple of other things I'll show you. I never know how much I should share, or if people are saying, geez, Jan, quit it out. But for the best of it, here we go. So we're going to look, first of all, at really just quickly at what you might look at for a page for yourself concerning the public administrator in your county. There will be something, and they will review what the current rules are, what the current law is, and what that particular county does. I know we're very different. Again, we actually have a person, Jerry Boland, who has taken on the job of public administrator. I won't say it's a thankless job, but it's not high pay, because the judge is going to be the only one who decides whether you get paid anything or not. On the other hand, I'm going to show you some things early on in 1891 where it could be quite helpful, and you could get quite wealthy in nothing flat at just 6% of a particular thing. That rule has changed today. So, and then we're going to discuss another fun thing at the end of today, how forensic genealogists are helping the public administrator with this particular thing. So that's one. I'll stop the share on it. Let's see. And go to another one to share. You got this handout, I believe, which will give you a lot of the notes for this. And I won't say any more than that. If you do want still the sheets that show the actual slides, you can ask me afterwards. There are a couple of you that like to have that. And that's fine. I'm always willing to share. I hope you guys are willing to share too. I'd love to get things from you. So I'll stop this share and go into you got another one that said the judge was mad and determined. And so you've got that particular thing. It just shows you exactly what happens when somebody decides to do a very thorough audit of a county and what is happening currently with probate cases, not just the one particular probate case or whatever, but this judge gets mad at people and says, do your jobs and do them now, or I'm coming after you really quickly. So there is somebody over this, always a probate judge, people making sure that these jobs get done. Other than that, I'm going to go into the presentation now, I hope, from the beginning. And hopefully y'all can see this, and we'll start the presentation. So the public administrator position as a county function, why do we even need it? What is this thing? And what do these dudes and dudettes do anyway with this position? Have we always had one? Pretty well. We've always had the means in the United States, even though it might take years and years and years to get estates settled, or to get something settled if the person died without a will, to figure out how we ended a woman's or a men's life officially. That is, with official papers. Now, that's not to say that we don't have some that slip through, because we do. My goals today are that you know the functions of a valuable public office. You know what happened then a long time ago, and some of what happens now. I've already told you how to find out what happens now in your county. I want you to gain an idea of the records you have available to you. In the presentation that to come, I didn't even mention the inquests and the coroner records, but you're likely to have those. You're likely to have things from all of those deceased who have no friends, no whatevers. Why do we need a county administrator? And you should be aware right away that some counties have chosen to combine this position with another position. And you'll see why. You'll see that county people, like county coroners, get pretty contentious when they're attempting to deal with a public administrator who says, I'd really like all those belongings you found and I'd like them now. And the county coroner says, I need to hold on to them for a particular reason or whatever. And sometimes the court or a judge even has to straighten that out. First of all, you need to know you receive no official pay. In Montana and many other states, you're required to take charge of estates of persons who died within your particular county, for which no administrators are appointed, and that due to a lack of administration are being wasted, they're being uncared for, they may have been lost. They're the estates of decedents who have no known heirs, or estates ordered into an administrator's hands by courts because they were mishandled. Anyway, all of those particular things. And I'm just going to see here if I can. No, I can't. Let's talk about people who have no known relatives, because this particular thing happens every day, nearly in every county within the United States. Maybe these people have relatives, but they're totally disconnected from their families. Or maybe truly there are no known relatives, and these people have or have not attempted to make arrangements for the end of their lives. Sometimes there are reclusives who said, just leave me alone, even in death. And sometimes there are former military, forgotten, service unknown, and sometimes you might see them described as the unaccompanied. And they can be very sad, all of these. Why would a person want a job like the public administrator? Well, there is a little bit of remunerative compensation, again, decided by the judges usually, but judges don't feel good about somebody having to hire an attorney to do components of the job. So many times, even if an attorney has been hired, it has to be with the understanding that they may not get too much pay either. But there are people who feel called to this position to ensure that nobody's forgotten. Some, like genealogists, love the research, have a sense of satisfaction in doing a thorough job. And somebody just want to stay close to these cases and see what happens in a particular case. So that's what it looks like. Let's talk first about a while back, say 120 years ago. I found this one in the Anaconda Standard, Anaconda, Montana. It says James Murphy's job, and he was the public administrator, is sometimes a losing game. He has to look after everyone, remember, and frequently he doesn't get too much from it. He says he was appointed nearly 2 years ago as administrator of the estate of the man by name of Ward. That guy was killed in a prize fight at Crystal Springs a year ago last December. After looking the things up and corralling the estate, he found it to consist of a tool chest containing a few dollars worth of tools, a small trunk with some old clothes. That was it. At the public sale, the whole estate was not worth more than $10. At that point, the administrator is in a quandary, as he's going to have to settle up the estate, go through the same formality as if he were looking at an estate that's worth $500,000. He's going to have to bear the expense, the court fees, the cost of advertising, an auctioneer were needed, attorney fees, the whole thing. There, at that point in 1891, he guesstimates, does Murphy, that that's going to come to nearly $100 that he's expected to pay, and then get his own money back in his commission by taking 6% on the first 1,000 of the receipts from the sale. Remember, this dude's whole worth was probably no more than $10. And he says, I strike more cases of that kind than any other, but they're coming rather thick. The public administrator in 1891 was required by law to apply for letters of admin of every real estate, however great or small, because at that point you just had to make sure that a person's estate was being taken care of. and his remuneration, that is his money, had to come out of the percent on the first $1,000 and 4% on the remainder. So it was very different. Let me tell you what he says about an estate down in Butte. The man's name was Horter, Horter. He died a year ago in 1890, left an estate of $48.50, one watch, and two $500 notes secured by a chattel mortgage on a head of cattle in Paradise Valley, Nevada. Well, there was a hard winter last year, and all the cattle in Paradise died. So he, Murphy, the public administrator, paid the court the attorney fees, liquidated the appraiser's salaries, and put up his cold cash for the publication of several semi-annual statements. The court ordered him to sell the estate, but it did not quite cover the expenses. And when it was all said and done, the county itself had to pay the undertaker 21 cents for burying the dead man. Another case of interest in 1891 was that of a man, Nablock, who was burned to death in the Chicago house down in Butte last summer. He left $300. Murphy was appointed administrator of the estate. The coroner held an inquest and then had the body embalmed and shipped it to friends in the East. After all the expenses were paid out of the estate, there remained $6, upon which the public administrator turned his official duties, and he managed to get a whole 42 cents out of that one. So the lot, many times, even today, of a public administrator has to be one where you really do want the job, because sometimes it is a losing game. The Montana law says that they may also be appointed as a conservator whenever a professional person has reason to believe that any person is in need of the appointment of a conservator for the effective management of their property affairs, or maybe somebody has already taken advantage of them. And so that's one more duty in Montana by Title 72, Chapter 15, that our public administrators perform. Now, that part is different in some states, which you're going to have to go look at the state and see what's there, because there are conditions and different things that are performed by various people. Briefly, then, if we're looking at everybody, not just Montana, you're going to protect the dead person's estate against waste, loss, misappropriation, or just being lost. It's just there. Maybe the clothing and the watch that the sheriff recovered upon getting the body is still sitting someplace in a type of limbo. And it is also, most importantly, the public administrator's job to locate information where possible, leading to the identity of next of kin, blood relatives, adopted children, people who have been named previously by the person as responsible for them, to look at, are there wills? Are there any pre-planned funeral arrangements? What are the assets and the debts? That's what a public administrator does in the short and in the long term. But there is an expectation by probate court, no matter what, that these things will be settled up. So when needed, a public administrator can make arrangements for a final disposition. Maybe it might be in conjunction with the county, making sure that that person's body is at least put in some kind of plot for which the Cascade County commissioners or other commissioners pay a certain fee each year. They must petition the court officially to be appointed the administrator of the estate. No exceptions. They are to try to locate persons entitled to inherit or to share or to help. They can manage, they can store, and they can sell real and personal property on behalf of the state, pay outstanding bills, all those kinds of things, and identify that the rightful people get to that particular end with the person who is being buried, that they are informed and they do know. Sometimes people are informed that a brother, a sister, an uncle, whatever, has died. Maybe that person is the only other living person, but they can And it sometimes happens that they will not take responsibility for it. And so the public administrator has to make sure that that's there, that there is a way for the public administrator to take care of it. And that means getting a statement, an official formal statement from the person saying, I am unable to take care of this responsibility. I do not wish to. And here is my statement. I can tell you that when we went down into the basement of the Cascade County Courthouse in 2004 and looked at the public administrator's area in the center of that basement, we found boxes of what I would call the small remains. That is the few remainders left after they found that nobody was available to take the pictures that the person had saved, to take the little keepsakes from family and family mementos that people had saved. And those particular things had not gone to auction. They went into the basement in the courthouse in Cascade County. I would imagine that there are other places where that indeed has happened. So sometimes it's worth saying, was anything left? Frequently, it might be a box of pictures. It might be keepsakes that family had shared with that person, or keepsakes that they had to hand on, and a person was never found to hand them on to. So those are some of the things you might find. Public administrator reports are required by law. And I'm going to tell you again, folks, that means records. Of course, I've already mentioned inquests. I've mentioned coroner reports for those people that died, and the circumstances other than homicide were not immediately known, were guessed at by the coroner, and the death certificate was settled. That was done by the coroner or a doctor of record. But there are still public administrator reports saying, okay, what happened to that watch? I finally sold it and received remuneration, or this is the list of what I sold, Judge, and you can decide where that money goes. But it is required by law. Some of these records can include a report per case to the court. Don't think that these are going to be long. They're not. If people died with very little, there will be a listing of what exactly was found in a particular place, of what exactly had to be done, the bills that had to be settled, the particular things, and you will still see these things going in as advertisements in newspapers, at least occasionally. Those reports are monitored by and can be called up again by court action, and nothing is done until the judge officially says this particular action is totally closed. We have closed this particular case out. You're going to find the obits that were written or not written. You're going to find mortuary records. And we've already talked before in one other presentation about all those things you can find out from the mortician's records that are not in that death certificate that you may find about. You're going to be able to go through a probate court record to closure. You'll see things in the newspaper like auction items with full listings of what is to be sold or whatever. You'll see ads advertising land saying it will be sold by either the public administrator or the sheriff in conjunction with the public administrator. Again, that depends on the law in the state, but also the way in which the local county administers with its own rules. There are 3 things that you can go out and look at very easily out online at Montana Codes Annotated, and I've given those to you in your handout. There's a part 1 that it tells you all those powers and duties again that I've already talked about. There's that part 2 where we're talking about what gets done exactly, and in part 3, the compensation or the actual termination of office, where one of these or some of these public administrators get the job, but then decide it's not too easy to do, and they'll either do it later, meaning they don't get it done at all, or They abscond with some monies. That happens very occasionally. Or they forget to close out the case. And if a judge is not watching over time, that can happen with many things. So occasionally, judges have what I would call kind of a clearance sale, only it's not a sale. It's called clearance. We're going to get this done. Who pays? In our state, the public administrator must receive and shall collect for the administrator's own use full compensation, but it's going to be just an itty bitty bit. If you are appointed a conservator, the judge decides what the reasonable sum is to be deducted from payments due to the protected person. Maybe that person is getting Social Security, and so the sum will be very, very small. But that public administrator is there to make sure that things are done and they're done right. And in the end, the compensation for the public administrator may not be less than $100. Even today, today that is nothing, but at least it tells you something. When that public administrator for an itty bitty estate is paid $100, you know one more thing without having to get the paperwork, and that is that it finally went through the probate court, and the probate court deemed that it was complete. So the bills are presented to the court as the public administrator did them. The court reviews and decides on appropriate payments. And usually this is very, very easy to do. And then decides whether, as allowed by law in proportion to the services necessarily rendered, the public administrator gets the money demanded. Here's what courts don't like. They don't like, for example, then or now, public administrators saying, well, I have to have an attorney to do a bunch of work for me. No, they now have the ability to go see the county attorney, for example, and get that advice. And so an outside lawyer, unless specified by family or whatever, is not going to give you those services necessarily rendered. Oh, you could hire an attorney, but they're not probably going to get paid. They're going to be answerable to the probate judge, district court. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the powers and duties. They do give a bond. They do take an oath of office. They have a duty to commence actions to recover property, to look at what it is. That even includes, maybe yanking the stuff away or getting a total inventory of what it is that the coroner or sheriff or police department has for a particular person, if that material is being held in part because of a suspicious death. The duty of a person, say that you had somebody come and you didn't know them very well and they happen to die in your house, you have a duty to notify the public administrator. Frequently, the sheriff or the police will perform that particular thing, but it will be done so that that person's life can be followed up by someone designated to do that particular thing. You might have civil officers or even people from the neighborhood who notify a public administrator of property in danger of loss or waste. Maybe that's a person who is presently still alive, but someone who's taking care of them is taking advantage. Maybe, we read about these cases in the newspaper every once in a while where somebody has gotten control of a bank account and has used money way beyond what should be done, et cetera. Maybe somebody says, yeah, he died at my house, but I'm not telling you anything. I'm not going to furnish a statement about it. I don't believe I have to. Well, there is a rule, 72-15-108, that says, yes, you have to do that. And the particular person has the right to get that done. Usually the sheriff or the cops will help you follow up with that. Or maybe it's a refusal to be examined about anything. It's a civil contempt kind of thing. And the county attorney will happen with that particular thing, but it must be initiated by the public administrator. Within duties, they have to make out an inventory, administer the account, deliver up the state when letters are granted to another. If you find somebody, for example, who says, yeah, I'll take that job on, then you deliver up everything in that estate right then when letters are granted to another by the probate court. They have a duty to keep a register of everything they do with regard to a particular person. And they must deposit all of the money they get with the county treasurer, and they must withdraw for administrative costs from there. Doesn't matter whether there's investments or whatever, the county treasurer for that particular kind of account is also responsible. They're responsible for monthly settlements, an annual report if it continues beyond a year. The court may require you to do additional reports or to give more for a bond. You can administer oaths where you're trying to get that statement back from the person where, for instance, somebody's particular materials are. Maybe you're trying to get information and a statement from a landlord, and the landlord says, well, it's simple. Oh, when that person died, I just bundled everything up and threw it away. And then you say, will you swear to that? I'm going to administer an oath. If you have it, you need to give it up. You did not have the right to do that particular thing, and so on. There's also some things that happen to you if you do not deposit the money. You forget to tell the county treasurer about something. There's action on your bond, and you will be followed. You can be terminated from office if you don't do the right thing. You, of course, you do get some little compensation. And if you're retiring, you may get permission to close up pending estates if it's going to be a really quick thing, but it cannot follow on for a long time. You are required, if somebody else is appointed or elected to the public administrator post, to account for what you've been doing and surrender any of the pending estates you have, and so on. So there are teeth in these rules. So now let me take you to the past. Sometimes cases were closed appropriately, but not always in a timely fashion. Sometimes administrators did not fulfill expectations of a job. In fact, sometimes they took the money and ran. Sometimes, in order to get at the bottom of a story, the court had to order a grand jury investigation with follow-up. And sometimes, folks, you're lucky because you're going to get a list of all the cases involved with those who had no family, willing to guide the probate and closure. You're going to find out everybody who was in that list. And that can really help you when you're looking at trying to find that person who is missing. They may have been using an alias. They may have been using some other names. Frequently, they might use a first name safe that they had used before, but used a different name. And then you can at least go after those cases and investigate and say, is this my Jeremiah, who is described here as Jera or whatever? So you can find a great deal from the past. Here's one that I thought was really neat. This was a public administrator auction of the John Liska estate in Ferndale, Montana, up in Lake County in 1975. Now, I happen to know this family, and I know he died. His mom died about 3 years before. John had never married. And here's the descriptor. I knew he'd owned land in Ferndale, but I'd already found out that he'd sold that. But on December 12th, 1975, in the Missoulian, page 38, it says there's going to be a public administrator auction 1 mile south and 1 mile east of Ferndale School on December 13, 1975. We'll provide you with lunch there because we want a lot of people at this thing. That's a nice little indicator that they expect a bunch of people if they're serving lunch. It says, the following buildings are going to be sold. And by the way, these buildings, we have to sell them, but they're located on land that you can lease from the state forestry department for $25 a year. So that's what John Liska had been doing at the end of his life. He had the buildings, he built the buildings, in fact, but he was on state forestry land department and paying the magnificent sum of $25 per year for that lease. So he had a 6-room house, he had a well house, a root cellar, 2 wood sheds, a hay shed, a barn, a granary, 2 garages, and 2 chicken houses. And he had things like a 31 International truck, a 1953 Nash. He had 6 guns, household goods, 100 bales of hay to sell, a Caterpillar trailer, fishing tackle, traps, because he'd been a trapper. That was a nice, valuable clue, wasn't it? And guess what? By the end of the day, they are all pretty well sold. And the State Forestry Department of Montana also had at least 2 potential people who wanted to lease that land. And they were in there together, and they had bought those houses and things together. So they were hoping that they could share the lease. Those are some of the neat things you can find at the end of a person's life. I'm going to go through just a few other things, ads and things that you can find before we tackle a couple of fun cases. So here's one in Illinois from 1841, selling real estate. Aaron Hamilton had died in Jersey County, Illinois, and his real estate was being sold because there was nothing else and the debts needed to be paid. And so it's described, it says there's a yoke of oxen, there's cows, there's horses, young cattle, corn, hogs, all kinds of things there. These are the kinds of sales that you might see early on. Look for these in newspapers. You'll find people and who their creditors were. So here's one from the Red Lodge Picket newspaper in 1896, the estate of Nels Anderson, deceased. Saying, you have 60 days to get to me with your bills. After that, even if you have a bill, tough luck. Or a notice to the creditors of the estate of Andrew Castle, deceased. Zimmerman was the public administrator for all the creditors of and all persons having claims against the deceased to give me your necessary paperwork within 4 months of the first publication of this notice in Helena, Montana. I tell you, these exist everywhere. Now, I want you to look at this one. Zimmerman may have been the public administrator, but he was employing an attorney to actually do a lot of the work for him. And this had pretty well ceased by 1925, folks. Probate courts were saying, there's enough of this. Either you are the attorney doing all the work, or if you're the public administrator, you're doing the work. And if you expect to get money for a local attorney or somebody you employ, other than for some really strange circumstances, you must explain, we're not paying this bill, not out of this estate. Charles Wagner was a person of some repute in Great Falls. He was very fine attorney. He served as a public administrator many times in Great Falls, even when at one point the attorney, the public administrator, absconded with funds. Here he is with the estate of Annie E. McGowan, saying, here you are again, exhibit these all within 4 months to me. Let's get this particular thing done. And what's particularly fun is to watch and see how many of these a person who is a fine public administrator can actually get done with in a month and can actually settle the cases. Here's another one where Wagner again said, okay, this is 1918. I am selling this particular land. The deed that you get will be at your own expense. 10% of the purchase money has to be paid immediately after the sale, with balance on confirmation of the sale by the court, because the court had to approve that sale. And it was John Waniel, a Finnish rancher, some 10 miles out of Geyser who had died. They could examine the particular thing. They could look at it and say, it's going to be sold for cash, folks. Land with a building thereon. Your job to go look for this particular thing. Here's another one where Judge Leslie in 1918 had put out a date for that particular thing. Anybody interested in the total estate, not just the land, of John Wayneo shall appear and show why the sale of the interest formerly owned by the deceased in a saloon out at Sand Coulee should not be ordered. Because the appraisers have been appointed, they've filed a report saying it's probably worth at least this much money. If you're going to claim some things out at Sand Coulee, in addition to these things in town, in addition to his ranch out of town, you need to be letting us know right now. Well, how were these people monitored? Of course, you're getting the idea right away that they were monitored and are monitored by the court. And that's a very, very valuable thing to do. We're going to take up the case surrounding a fellow in Helena, Montana in 1892 by name of F.W. Ellis, E-L-L-I-S. F.W. Ellis was the public administrator of record. He'd been there for at least 2 years. So since 1890, perhaps even a little more. And when the judge investigated, he found that not one of the cases that this man had been responsible for were actually being worked on at the time. It was a highly interesting case to see because this fellow, I'm sure, meant to do things with the case, but they didn't always get done, not in a timely fashion. And the judge got mad. You have in your handouts a thing where I said the judge was mad and determined to make things right. Well, he was mad about Ellis and what he hadn't done, but he was also mad when he looked at everybody else, all those people who were responsible for probates in Lewis and Clark County in 1892. And he said, nobody's getting everything done that needs to be done. So he was mad enough that he released the list of all known estates being probated to the newspaper and said, I'm calling for these reports right now, and I'm issuing citations to people in charge of these estates, because it says only 8 of 63 that are current have ever been reported to the court or started through probate. Judge Buck was ticked. It says there are 63 estates in this county in which the executors and administrators are behind with reports showing the condition of the estates which are in their care. In the majority of the estates, no reports have ever been filed with the clerk of the court as the law requires, and the court records are concerned there's nothing to show how these estates stand. He's going to enforce the law. You're getting a citation. Here's a complete list. So just know that the sheriff is coming after you. But now back to Ellis. He was the public administrator in Helena. He had 20 some cases out there, and he had done nothing with any of them. How were they going to be monitored? And, the court had already said he had his suspicions. What would be done with this? Well, Public Administrator Ellis was formally indicted for his action in handling all of the estates because he hadn't handled any of them. How was he formally indicted? Well, he was formally indicted by a grand jury that judge called to take a look at the condition of 2 things that were occurring in Helena in 1892. He wasn't pleased with the public administrator for sure. And so that particular person, after the particular jury looked at everything and looked at the case, looked to see what was happening with the case, after they said, there's nothing being done here, this man needs to be held to account, then there was a particular action against him before the court, and the sheriff went and arrested him, and he paid $350, I believe, to get out of the pokey at that point. And he was severely chastised within the court and told to bring the records to the court immediately, get his work done, or resign. At that point, of course, the county commissioners knew about this because they had been told that none of this work had been done. Well, the judge at that point was also not pleased with the school board in Helena. They were busy building a high school, and he had the grand jury investigate that too. Because you see, the clerk of the school board was a guy by the name of F.W. Ellis. So he had two different jobs, and neither one being done satisfactorily. I can tell you that when the judge and the grand jury investigated the case for the school board, they found that there were many people on the school board, the school board members and others, who were doing an end run around the architect that they had hired to be in charge of the building project. They were doing exactly what they wanted to do. So they were also chastised. It's just funny to see all of the things that you can find. By the way, the commissioners said in a meeting in March of 1892 that they would be pleased to accept his resignation. Well, what's interesting is they had about 12 days in this meeting. These meetings took place only a few times a year at that point, so they would go as much as they could with a particular piece of business, adjourn for that day, and then come back the next day. And about 8 days later, they said, nah, maybe we'll keep him around. We're going to rescind that notification saying that he has to resign. I'm still following to see what is happening with that particular one. In Great Falls, however, in 1906, there was no doubt. There was a guy by the name of Merrill who became the public administrator who flat out embezzled funds. And the sheriff went after him and went after the bondsmen. Now, the bondsmen were those people who put up money in the first place and said, Merrill's a good guy. He'll fulfill his job in addition to the $1,000 that Merrill put up. They went back because there was money embezzled and they could not immediately find Merrill. They went back and said, okay, you were official bondsman for this person, so you're up for it. We need to recover this money, or as much as there is. So there were means to be able to recover monies when these particular things happened. These are always interesting cases. And believe me, the paperwork is amazing to see what is there as judges issue official writs, as sheriffs go after people, or even the notes from the clerk of court as to what has happened with a particular case because nothing has been filed for 2 months. Those are well worth your time. When you think that somebody is really poor and they really didn't have anything, and you know that the county buried them or whatever, it's still worth going after things to see what happened truly with any of their monies. Or maybe it's the case of a madam who owned several houses of ill repute in Great Falls, who had Charles Wagner as her official attorney, not just as a public administrator attorney, but he made sure that her land was followed squarely through. And she was a wealthy woman and quite a bit there. if you saw our program last summer about the quilt that was given to a lady, then you saw that particular thing and what happened with the considerable amount of ranch land, houses of ill repute, and places that she owned in Great Falls. And at that time, the reason I bring up Wagner is he said at that time, he said, I handle these cases the same as if they were my particular case in my law firm. I will handle them with the same such care. Now that's a great public administrator. What about these people who die unaccompanied? Meaning they don't have a relative available. They're buried. Maybe the county buries them, or they're buried, even if they are a military burial, they are buried alone. In recent years, we have seen what places have done to take care of these particular people, and they rarely have a particular funeral devoted just to them, but many will be honored by the veterans organizations at least a couple of times a year, or even we've seen cases where mortuaries have done this, or local service clubs have taken it on as a special responsibility to make sure that people who die unaccompanied don't die without being remembered. They're honored for their service during their lifetime, but they don't receive anything at the end of their lives. And here's a poignant one. Here's Franklin D. Roten. And by the way, his name was spelled various ways in the records: Roaten, Roatan, Rotan, whatever. And his family suffered the same thing. He was a private in the U.S. Army in Korea, born in 1933, died January 7, 2021. He is at the columbarium out of Yellowstone County with help from agencies there. I want you to notice that he had received the Distinguished Service Cross. This is just right below the highest award that can be given to anyone. Finally, someone in Billings investigated this person. There are stories out online that you can go to. He lived in a tiny hovel of a house in Billings, took care of his mom, who lived in an even tinier house on his property, was this pretty much forgotten individual. Nobody knew too much about him in Yellowstone County, but this is what it means in being an unaccompanied veteran. These are the things and the stories we can bring about that we all can help if we're trying to find out what the story is on this particular person or these people who deserve more than no one at their funeral. He leaves little evidence of his heroics on the battlefield, but he left a great deal. He came back to Billings. He lived his life quietly, was employed, not at any big time job or anything else, but in the end, he was remembered. And you'll see that story appeared out at the Montana and out online on November 11, 2021. So you can find that. Today, county administrator duties can be decided by the county, but the county has to fulfill that law. So go out and take a look at how your local county provides these services. I've given you these links in your handouts. Maybe sometimes the county attorney is responsible. Maybe it's a person especially appointed who has a real special need to care for these. Maybe they're hired as expertise is needed. You need to find out what kinds of reports can be accessed, how they have actually dealt with personal property. I'm haunted when I think of people who are missing and they've been identified as missing, whatever happens with the things they left in their lives. I don't know if a county administrator ever comes to that duty or if it is handled mutually between the coroner and a county administrator or a county attorney or whatever. I'm sure that in each county, eventually it gets to that, but it's something that you need to look at. there's something interesting that we can do. I mean, here's my Cascade County. You can go out and take a look at it. It says the authority is this important thing called home rule. If you look over there on the right, meaning we kind of decide things the way we want them. Most counties in Montana do precisely this. You will find this authority there. It's really interesting. Could I find a satisfactory definition of it? Not to my satisfaction, but looking at it, other than maybe a case or two right now, our county structure seems to be fine and it seems to be appropriate. But go out and look to see how your particular county handles this particular function. You may be able to help a friend who says, look, this person died. Well, I don't know what to do. They don't really have a lot. They don't have anything. They certainly don't have enough to have an attorney or whatever. So what's going to happen? Frequently, you may find out that they did make arrangements with a mortician, that they did make some kinds of arrangements in some ways, but at least you can tell people there is an officer of the law who can help you to see what's going on. Maybe they won't take the case because they can find someone else who is very willing to take the case and do it. Maybe it's another family member, but the information is there where needed for you. There's another thing that we can do today. I won't say that it's hot off the press because trained forensic genealogists have been helping for at least the last 15 to 20 years, various places. I will tell you, if you want to look at a position like that, they provide the expertise to actually look up things like the query that the Great Falls Genealogy Society got from a law firm just last week, wanting to know if we knew where the address was or who was taking care of or who had the records for the St. Thomas Orphans Home that closed in Great Falls about 40 years ago. Now, that's actually looking at a forensic problem for them. And we were able to give them the appropriate address out in Seattle, but sometimes they will work with a forensic genealogist who can tease out just who was supposed to get a certain thing according to a will that is actually still in force. So there are a variety of things that forensic genealogists can do. There is a council, an official council called the Council for the Advancement of Forensic Genealogy. They do provide a thing called the Forensic Genealogy Institute for educational opportunities, teaching people how to professionally gain their credential, which includes the portfolio, all of the steps in opening and closing a case, all the things that we would expect, for instance, from the National Genealogical Society, only it is specifically honed and people are specifically trained to do forensic genealogy activities. So there are people there to do things. I know that some people have been interested in this before. You'll see ads right now where you can hire a forensic genealogist. Somebody is saying they're available. They're a probate research firm, experienced at providing expert, not only research, but remember also testimony and providing good research based on solid and sound kinds of materials, that is, particular certificates that are official from counties and so on, to prove the death, to prove the birth, to prove everything within a case. And also, they are experts at writing up the case so that people can read a good legal proceeding that we can actually understand, involving particular kinship things that are being queried or questioned through a law firm, and perhaps a lawsuit. It's not my free webinar. I'm just saying, here's their ad for their forensic genealogy. I know they had an ad out there March 1. saying, have you ever wondered in the first place what type of work they do? So I've advised some people, if you're interested in that, go out to that group and ask when they're doing their free webinar. Again, you may learn some really neat stuff, even if you don't want to do forensic genealogy. In conclusion, we do need public administration of probate. We need public administration even for those missing persons related cases where you have a person who is not able to take care of their own life. They're not able to do the day-to-day things. Recognize again that each case is going to be unique, but there are basic requirements that are defined by all states and all places. So in conclusion, hopefully you have enjoyed this particular thing.